All right. This is the way that I started out the program when I did the Vine neighborhood 3-4 years ago. And the discussion about how, for so many people, when they travel through a neighborhood, this is the way they travel through it, and a one-way street. And so that pertained to Vine neighborhood when I showed how, for many people, when they travel through the Vine neighborhood, they go down either South Westnedge on one direction, South Park on the other. Well, unfortunately, I sat back and I thought, it's the same thing for the most part in the Stewart neighborhood. They're either going down Kalamazoo Avenue this way or coming down West Main this way. And the Stewart neighborhood also has the unfortunate challenge, too, that not only do you have one-way streets coming Kalamazoo and West Main, but you think of Mishkal and part of Douglas Avenue. But it's unfortunate when people travel that way and they don't really get into the neighborhood, because then they miss something like this, of course, reading the Grand Historical Marker. There are two in the neighborhood. This is the one that's in front of the church on the corner of Woodward and West Main, and tells you a little bit about it. Of course, we already know a mistake that's on the historical marker if you attended the program last week, and that is when they talk, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we look at Charles Stewart's house. But the other thing that going on those one-way streets prevents you from doing, and that is getting into the neighborhood and getting to know and getting to see the houses. Like these three houses here, these three brick houses right here, this one, and this one, that were all built by George Rickman around 1888 in the 400 block in the Stewart neighborhood. And you miss that when you go on those one-way streets. Sharon showed this map last week. This is the 1883 bird's eye view. And she pointed out at that point in time that unfortunately it doesn't really show a great deal of the Stewart neighborhood, but it does show a little bit, and we can see some of the things. Right here, of course, we have Elm Street. We have Woodward Avenue right here, and there are some homes that we can pick out. We can pick out the Johnson home, where Angie and Herm Van Hammersfeld live right there. But the 1-2 we also see now keep in mind this map, because 2 weeks from today I have the pleasure, and I will wear pockets in 2 weeks, to talk about Arcadia Creek. And it's interesting when you look at this map, and we'll look at it a little bit more next week, because you can see the creek coming along in here. But right over here, this house right here on the corner of Woodward and West Main Street is the Frederick Woodward house. Sharon talked about Frederick Woodward last week and being an early resident of the Stewart neighborhood. But before that house was there, of course, we had this house here. Now this house is known as the Bartholomew House. It's the oldest house in the Stewart neighborhood. Sharon talked about it 2 weeks ago. It was built, let's see, how does it sound? Can people hear me like this? Can you hear me all right? Because this is driving me crazy. Okay, I'm going to try to do it without it, just because I kept getting a reverberation or whatever. So here we have a Greek Revival, with the earliest house in the Stewart neighborhood. Greek Revival, first style of architecture in Michigan, popular between 1820 and probably into the 1850s. Was something that had been very popular over on the east side of the United States, came over here to the Midwest, and after they had built their log cabins, this is one of the first styles that they created. This one is a temple style of Greek Revival. It's very simple. It's got a very interesting portico here with the pillars. Oh, I guess that's what the pointer is for. The pillars right here and the portico, and you can see we've got a square portico right here. The thing about the Bartholomew house that's always interesting is when you look at the cornice, it's got a very, very unique, interesting Greek key design. Many, many years ago, I had the pleasure of coming into this house, and that pattern was replicated on the floor, too, when you first walked in. Very, very nice. Now, exactly when this house was built, as Sharon pointed out last week, we really don't know. But we do know that it was moved to this site. In fact, this is the 1873, this is another thing that Sharon showed, a portion of the 1873 county atlas, and you can see right here we know that at least by 1873, Bartholomew's house was located here. Now it's interesting because that house was moved to make way for that house built by Frederick Woodward, and you can see who owns a lot of the property in this area is Frederick Woodward. So it makes me curious about whether or not did Woodward move the house and then give them the land for it. I don't know, but there you have the Bartholomew house right there. Here we have another view of it. Another characteristic of Greek Revival, we have windows are all about the same shape and size. Here we have 6 window panes over 6 window panes, 6 over 6. We've got the decorative shutters on the side, and also on the corners of the home we have pilasters, which gives it some level of symmetry. And over up here on the corner, another characteristic of Greek Revival is the returning cornice. And you can see how it starts here, comes down, and returns, the returning cornice. All characteristics of the Greek Revival style. So the oldest house. So one of the earliest styles we have here in the Stewart neighborhood. And I think that's one thing about the Stewart neighborhood that might surprise people. The variety of styles, the variety of architectural styles that you can find in this neighborhood. Gothic Revival. Now, we talked about this house last week too, the Prouty Home, built in 1852. And this one also appears in the 1883 bird's eye view map. Sharon pointed it out last week. Here we have the Prouty Home right here. Of course, before, I don't think I can see Eleanor Street here, but there we have it right there. Of course, not its original location, but where it was moved to later on. Of course, as you remember, this home also was the star of the cover of Peter Schmidt's book, 19th Century Homes in a Midwestern Village, with photographs done by Balthazar Korab. And I think he liked that photograph so much that Balthazar Korab used it in a book he did on an architectural alphabet. And this made a very interesting A. So the Prouty Home is a style of what we called Gothic Revival, which is one of the next styles that was popular at this time period. And one of the things that we know about Gothic Revival is one of the characteristics, is its high-pitched roof, high-pitched gable roof. Okay, it's coming off into a triangle. This one's got a very interesting bay window on the front. Okay, it's got that Gothic arch along the porch line there that you can see it. On the side, we see 2 dormers. And look at that tracery. Now, whether or not you'd call it tracery or gingerbread or whatever, certainly seems like a very decorative element to the home. You can see it up here on the gable roof, and you can see it here on the side of the dormers, up there on the dormers, on the tips of the dormers. So Gothic Revival. Windows are about all the same shape and size, very similar to what we saw in the Greek Revival. And these homes, it was said that these homes, Gothic Revivals, at this point in the 1850s and maybe a little bit into the 1860s, were painted colors that reflected nature. And this house, if you remember from this, when this picture was taken in the 1970s, the house was white. In fact, I think the house was white for many years. And then it's gone through, I don't know how many different paint colors. This one, I don't know if that's, my pictures are not that good. I don't know if it's still gray or what, but it's been sort of those kinds of color schemes. The next style we see coming into the neighborhood sort of was around as same time. Now, the thing I like to say with architectural styles, and I've done this on my walks too, and in the years that I've been involved in doing this, when I give the 20-year time span of these architectural styles, that just gives you a little framework. So when I tell you that Italianates were built between 1860 and 1880, of course this house right here just throws it out the window because this is actually earlier than 1860. This is the Stewart house. However, this is another example of a historical marker gone wrong. Because if you've read the historical marker states that the house was built in 1858 by Charles Stewart, who was a well-known lawyer, eventually served as the United States Senator from Michigan, and owned a lot of real estate in the area. But Sharon pointed out last week the house was actually built by a gentleman named Hiram Arnold. Now, how this house became, the history became more Charles Stewart than Hiram Arnold, I don't really know. The marker was installed in 1966. But anyway, what we see in the Stewart house is the classic Italianate, cubic in shape. The other thing we're going to see with this one, and you can see it just a little bit, is the cupola up at the top. Windows, all about the same shape and size. Whereas the Gothic might have been a little bit asymmetrical, this is very symmetrical. This is actually a photograph from 1909 when the home was owned by Charles Hayes. And I apologize because I think when I was doing a PowerPoint I made it a little too wide. I don't think it's that wide there. But it's interesting when you look at it, when you look at the portico or porch that's on this house in 1909. So the Stewart house, or at that time, the residence of Charles Hayes. Picturesque Kalamazoo was a wonderful book of photographs that came out in 1909 by Labadie's. And the houses in the Stewart neighborhood, there aren't that many houses in the Stewart neighborhood that were photographed. This one and two other ones. So here we have the Stewart house again in the Italianate style. And we know that, I don't know exactly when this circular portico was added right there, but the classic Italianate. Well, the thing about the Stewart neighborhood is the Stewart neighborhood is rich with Italianates, but all different shapes and sizes. We have Italianates such as this one, which is on Woodward, and this is the Ashby house, and this is 1873. Again, a lot of those same features that we saw with the Stewart house, the cubic shape, basic cubic shape, windows about the same shape and size, molding over them. Here we have a very simple portico. Okay, here we've got the bay window on the side. The roof is hipped, so it's not gabled. We now have hipped, and we've got a wide cornice here. So we've got that one. Across the street from the Stewart house, we have the Austin home. This is built at about the Kate Austin home. This was built around the same time period, 1873, as the one that we saw before. Same sort of features. Now it's got some siding on it, different from what it would have been originally. The porch might have been different, but you see that basic shape. Now there you can really see the hipped roof, where you have all four sides that come together up to a point. So this is 1873. Then we have this house, Sharon. Oh, come on, don't say yikes, it's not that back. Now I called it the Pengelly house. Now is there another word that you use, another name that you give it? Okay. Well, of course. What date do you have for this Italianate?
I'm embarrassed to say I've never gotten a good date on it.
Okay.
To me, it seems early, it's small, and yeah, I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, don't be embarrassed to say. There's nothing about being embarrassed.
They have something a little more exact. It's there by the late 1870s.
Okay, so the late 1870s, which would make sense when you've got across the street, you've got the Phillips home, and the Phillips is 1873. So you see that we've got in the 1870s, you know, for a long time when you looked at the history of the Stewart neighborhood, they would say, oh, the impact of the streetcar and how the streetcar brought all these people to the Stewart neighborhood, and you've got this wealth of Queen Anne's. You've also got some really nice Italianates in this home, which shows that there were people living in here definitely by the early 70s. And then when I show you this house right here, we definitely know that they were living here even back in 1864. This is the Dr. Johnson home, or the Dr. William Johnson home that Angie knows so well, built in 1864. And the thing about these architectural styles, which I love, is that you have simple Italianates like this and more elaborate Italianates like this. But they still have those basic features that you're looking at in those houses. The shape, the roof line, the hipped roof. Okay, here we have a cupola up here. It's got a little, looks like a little finial up at the top. Very simple portico or entryway here. Now obviously here the windows are very different from what we've seen before, but there is some uniformity to those windows. You know, just a wonderful, wonderful. And when you look at the cornice up here, you've got those, you know, whereas before with something like this, the Phillips home, very simple, wide cornice, no brackets. Here we have a wide cornice and paired brackets. So you could have different variations of this style, of the Italianate style, much of which you find in the Stewart neighborhood. I shouldn't play favorites, but I do like this one. Years ago, when the Kalamazoo County Historical Society had a homes tour, I got to be in charge of this one. Oh, that was nice. That was great. We got the bay window on the side here too. This one is always interesting to show. Now, this picture is sort of skewered a little bit. This also comes from the 1909 Picturesque Kalamazoo. This little Italianate, well, you know, not bad Italianate, that was built for Julius Caesar. Don't you love it when someone gives you a middle name of Caesar? Sort of sets you up for something. Julius Caesar Burroughs, who also was a lawyer in town and also served as a United States Senator to Michigan. This house is 1972. Okay, again, looks very similar to those Italianates that we've been looking at from the I pressed the wrong one. It's got those paired brackets at the cornice, it's got the shape, it's got the windows, looks like a shutter missing over here. Got a very interesting porch when you look at it, and I've never really noticed that lately. Makes me wonder if that porch might have been added at a later date. But because my finger slipped, you know what that house looks like now. That is the Julius Caesar Burroughs house. Now it's a little brighter than what I'm used to. I've seen it a little more subdued, but quite a difference between that and that. I don't know, but you know, when you look at it, you can still see those Italianate brackets over here. You can still see some of the original windows, but they really added a lot onto it. Now, how much of that was necessitated by the change in use of the home? Maybe it was becoming rental. Maybe a taste difference in architectural styles as far as, you know, because you've got like a bay window here. You've got all these additions that are added on. Then someone, somewhere, at some time, added that neoclassical, portico with the pillars and the pediment, with why fish scale shingling up in the up there in the gable. I don't really know, but it's, had we not seen this photograph, we never would have known what this house looks like originally compared to what it looks like today. But it was Italianate. It was Italianate. Then we have different versions of Italianate that you can find in the Stewart neighborhood. This is the Rufus Tyler home. This is on West Main Street, almost at the, well, it is at the corner of West Main and Douglas Avenue. This is 1872, so again, we still have those early 1870s. This has got some of those features. Yep. You see in Italianates with the rounded windows. Okay, now these are rounded, but again, uniform size. Now you'll notice the ones down here on the first level are longer than the ones here on the second level. This has got brackets up at the cornice. Very simple portico on the front, but you can see the roof line is different. It's not the cubic shape that we would see in other Italianates. It's got more of a gable. So this sometimes is referred to as an irregular Italianate. An irregular Italianate. We have one here. Now this is 1872. Then we have this home on Woodward Avenue that's also an irregular Italianate. And the date that we have on this one is 1878. And this is another home that was built by George Rickman, who then also built those three houses almost behind this one on Stewart Street. And this is really interesting because it's an L-shaped Italianate, but it's got pilasters on the corners. Now this bay window is interesting because when I was co-authoring the book with Pam O'Connor on Kalamazoo Lost and Found, I interviewed Leslie and Fred Decker, who owned the home at the time, and they had an interesting photograph which we used in the book that showed the bay window on the front, but it didn't look like this. It's a little bit different than this. An L-shaped, very much like the L-shaped Greek revivals, but look at the wide cornice here. Okay, so this is an irregular Italianate. Another interesting version of Italianate we have in the Stewart neighborhood is we've got a couple houses like this. This is the James Kent home, and this is another early one. This is 1865. And this is right at the intersection of Kalamazoo Avenue and Douglas, so the house is on Douglas Avenue. What's interesting here is that pagoda-like roof. Again, very different from the regular Italianates that we see. You know, it's got, again, you know, the regular long, narrow windows. Look at that decoration up there at the cornice. Look at what paint does to that in bringing that out. But it's interesting when you look at the pagoda roof, because what is said about why this became popular is because at this time in the 1850s and maybe even into the early 1860s, there was an interest in things Japan. The United States, I don't want to say discovered Japan, because Japan had been still around. Japan wasn't, you know, whatever, anyway. But I think that when you look at our architecture and look at other matters, I think it influenced a lot of things. And so we see that with the Kent home here. And then this home, here's an older picture of it. This is the Ealing home next to the Tyler home. This is what it looked like, probably not long after it was built. And this is what it looks like now, also on West Main Street. And so you can see the repetition of the pagoda-like roof. And I did not look for the date on this one, but I think this is also early 1870s. The home next to it is 1872, and this is not long after that. But it's got, again, those windows, the portico. Here we've got a nice bay window on the side, and that pagoda-like roof. So a lot of different interesting versions of Italianate. The Isaiah Flagg home on Stewart Street. This one is 1866. Now this is really interesting because I'm not a hard person when it comes to what you call different houses. And in some books, this house is referred to as an Italianate. And you know, it's got the windows, it's got the portico. Yes, it's got an addition on the front. It's got the bay window on the side. It's got that cornice with those brackets. But the one thing that it has that's unique to other Italianates in the area is that mansard roof. So there will be some books that instead of Italianate, they'll refer to this as Second Empire. Second Empire, which was a style around the time of Italianate, around the same time period. And one of the distinctive features of the Second Empire is that mansard roof, which is something that originated in France and then eventually came over to the United States. There's a couple houses in the Stewart neighborhood of that, which makes it very unique because the one building we have in Kalamazoo that has the mansard roof is the old Lawrence and Chapin Iron Works over on North Rose Street. And that one was built around 1872. This is 1866. Another interesting one, of course, just down the block a little bit from the Flagg home, is the Davidson McKee home. Now this is 1867. So Flagg is 1866, Davidson is 1867. So just about a year difference. And again, a lot of those same features, and again, that mansard roof, which makes it Second Empire. Now the third house, of course, what's interesting is the Griffith House over on Kalamazoo and Elm Street. Same predominant elements of the Italianate, and it's got a little mansard roof in the tower. So whether or not you would treat that the same way as the Flagg home that has the total mansard roof, as opposed to the Griffith House that has this right here, I don't really know. Most of the books describes this as Italianate. I don't know exactly what one could call it, but it's interesting when you look at the Stewart neighborhood because of the variety of different types of Italianates that they have. It wasn't just one set Italianate. They really went far with this style. And whether or not, again, that was a reflection of the people who lived in the neighborhood, what was popular, their taste, you know, what was available, you know, whatever. It's a very nice collection of that style. Then we get into the next style. And this is the one that the Stewart neighborhood always has been known for, and that is their Queen Anne's. It has been said that because of the coming of the streetcar line in the mid-1880s, that this allowed people to actually get out from the downtown and ride the streetcar to the Stewart neighborhood. And so they were able to then come into this neighborhood. And I've never really seen, and Sharon, you've done some history of the neighborhood, whether or not there was a big growth in the 1880s or not, or if it was just, because it,
Takes off with that, more so. I mean, and different size houses. But I've never plotted it out. That would be a fun one to do.
Sharon and I are always doing this at the archives where we'll say, boy, that would be a fun thing to do. That would be a fun project to do. We're in the midst of a real fun project now, aren't we, Sharon? How do you move 30,000 cubic feet of material to a new building and still remain sane? You blow bubbles, that's what I can tell you. You blow bubbles and eat chocolate. Okay, anyway. But the thing about the Stewart neighborhood, of course, is it's known for its Queen Anne architecture. Queen Anne, a style between 1880 and 1900. So right as the Stewart neighborhood is growing, they're tapping into this style. And, gone is the symmetry of the Italianates. And we've got more asymmetrical houses that are coming up, including this one. This is the Bartlett Upjohn home. Originally built by Edgar Bartlett in 1886. Said he was a hardware salesman. That must have been one heck of a hardware store. That's all I can say. But anyway, and then later on the home of Henry Upjohn. And the thing is, of course, with this, you've got a lot of angles. You've got gable roofs. You've got these homes that are trying to give texture, and how they're going to do that is siding all over the place. Siding in all different shapes. You can see this one where the siding is going this way. This one where the siding is going that way. One of the things, too, with this one, you've got towers. And for many, many years, this had a really nice finial on it. I don't know if you would call it a finial. I think probably that would be one thing. And it was gold, and sometimes the sun would shine on it, and it just, just glowed. It was really, really interesting. One thing about this house that I've always loved, of course, this was the era of the porch. Whereas with the Italianates, you had that very simple portico. Here is where you really get into the porches. And that's where I wonder, when you look at that picture of the J.C. Burroughs house, whether or not that porch might have been added later on during this time period. But I've always loved the detail that you see on this home. And you see that on a lot of the porches. So this is 1886. But not all Queen Anne's had to be huge. Again, in the Stewart neighborhood, we've also got smaller ones, like the Grant Tuttle home on Woodward Avenue. This is also called the Queen Anne. This is 1885, so this is 1 year earlier than that previous home we looked at. And when you look at this one, very, very simple. But they've got some interesting decorative elements into this. There's a corner window right here, and there's a decorative element there. The porch here, very, very nice. But when you look at it, nothing on the gable, very, very simple, but it's still classified as a Queen Anne. Oh, and then we have this house, the Chapel Stewart house, which I must say is currently on the market. I didn't get the for sale sign in the corner. The Chapel Stewart house is 1880. Yes?
That's the one where one of the local citizens looked at it and proclaimed they killed the wrong architect.
That's an interesting statement. But this is another one that a lot, the book Walking Through Time, written by Brendan Heenahan, and also Peter Schmidt's book, classifies it as a Queen Anne, and I guess it really fits within that Queen Anne time period. But this is one that really takes that whole concept of Queen Anne and just really, really brings it out. And this is one that I'm going to have to put on my list, because I would love to see, as many of you know, at the archives we have access to the Kalamazoo Gazette between 1866 and 1922, whether or not there's anything in the Gazette about this building, about when this building came out. because you talk about being unique. And that's the thing about Queen Anne homes. They wanted those homes to be unique. They wanted those homes to be special. They wanted those homes to be different than anybody else. And so when you look at the angles and the shingles and the texture and the gable roof and the porch, I mean, it's just incredible. Every time I see that home, I see something different that I haven't seen before. For years, this was painted a dark brown, and there was 2 owners of the home that really, you know, they repainted the home and really brought out so many of those details that you missed when it was just a simple one monochromic color. And you know, that was the thing about the Queen Anne houses, that you would have a situation where they would be painted 4 or 5 different colors. And all of that just accentuated so much of it. I mean, there's a little porch over on the north side of the home that's just the cutest little thing. It's just an absolute incredible home. Here's the front part of it. The realtor recently, probably last year, I don't have them with me today, gave me some photographs of the interior of the home. And it's just incredible what the owners at that time, yes?
Actually, just because it is for sale, a lot of the interior photos are online.
Okay.
Through a realty website.
So I think it's, I want to say 213 Elm. I'm not sure if it's 213 Elm. So if you get on the computer, you can see some of the interior shots of the home that it looks like. Of course, when you look at the shots of the home, you have to remember that the furnishings are, from what I can probably guess, are not going to come with the home. But it's absolutely incredible. So this is 1880. This is 1880, and I'm sure that when I take people on tours and we go by this house, people will tell me, when I was little, I thought the witch lived in it, or when I was little, I thought this, or this was a gingerbread house, or whatever. So just like I get the comments about the water tower, and that was Rapunzel and all that kind of stuff. I think you get the same sort of things from little kids when they look at this house here. We've got the Taylor. I love that. Oh, God bless you, Peter. You know, he just didn't. Peter Schmidt named a lot of these homes based on who were either the early residents or the long-term residents. And I guess when you have a house like this, you have to have a house that has 3 names attached to it. And this is referred to as the Taylor Hatfield Sutherland home, which is a mouthful, but this is 1889. And it was really nice because there were some students that came to the archives. We've been getting a lot of curiosity seekers, people just roaming in, looking around because they haven't been in the building before. And I had 2 students that came in last week, one of whom wanted some information about their house, and it turned out to be this one. And they were so thrilled when I was able to pull some things off and show them. The house was built in 1889, and I gave them whatever information I could gather at that quick moment. But this house, these rounded windows on the 2nd floor have always just amazed me. And the other thing too, this porch, just this lavish, wonderful porch. I wonder if they would allow me just to come and sit there and just like watch the Stewart neighborhood go by. But you know, you've got a very interesting stained glass window here on the side. You've got, again, shingles over here. You've got like fish scale or sawtooth shingles. Got a little bit of detail here in the gable. Look at the posts there on the porch. Again, the tower, classic Queen Anne.
When does the porch circle around?
It ends just about to the edge right here, because they've got a stairway over here on the side, so it doesn't encircle the entire home. Okay, this one right here, help me for those of you in the neighborhood. What street am I on? Woodward? Okay. I'm looking at these pictures, and I took so many pictures. In fact, I went there for 2 days and took pictures. I can't remember where I went, you know, and it's not that big of a neighborhood. Okay, here is another Queen Anne. This has got a very interesting detail just under the tower here. You can see a little bit of the detail on the porch. And again, tower. Now this one I know. This is the French Allen home on Stewart Street. This is a later Queen Anne. This is 1895. And one of my fondest memories on the first homes tour that I went on in 1981, worked at a home in the West Main Hill neighborhood. Mr. Harold Allen was still living. And he stood in the kitchen that entire day and greeted people as they came through his home. But this home here is a very interesting clipped gable here up at the top. So rather than triangular, looks like it's just sort of been cut off, little clipped gable. We've got that tower, and look at the detail on this porch. Absolutely beautiful. And this one's gone through a couple paint jobs, and this is 1895, the French Allen home. This is on Woodward Avenue, and this is the Miller Steers home. This is 1891, and now we see Queen Anne in the use of brick for this. And this one is interesting because it's got this, of course, it's got this beautiful tree flowering in front of it, but you can see the tower right here. You can see the band running above the windows. Now, it's interesting with this one that, okay, it's 1891, so we're still in the midst of the Queen Anne period, but the windows are a little more regular in size, so they're not irregular as with a lot of Queen Annes, but this is still classified as a Queen Anne. Okay, here is from picturesque Kalamazoo, the William Hill House. Now, this is the 1890 version of picturesque Kalamazoo, and here's the William Hill House today. It's obviously has gone through some changes. It had been a single-family home, and of course, been a nursing home for a time period, multifamily. But so there is an addition on over here. But when you look at it, other than the roof line changing right here, you can see the basic Queen Anne structure here. Now this is, I don't have a date for the Hill House. We do know if it's in picturesque Kalamazoo in 1890. It's at least 1890. But again in brick, and you can see that molding, that coarse work around the top of it, and it's got a very interesting stained glass window up on the side. But again, got a lot of angles, got a lot of, got the tower here with a little bit of finial up at the top, and then a gable right here. This is another one. Oh, this is, I think this is about circa 18, this is the Wright home. This is 1894. So, and this has got another Queen Anne, wonderful, beautiful porch, nice little sunburst, little design up there at the gable roof. So, no tower, but you didn't need a tower to make it a Queen Anne. But again, very asymmetrical. And this has got the fish scale shingles in this part of the gable right there. And this is the Balch home. I was trying to be very respectful because there was a woman sitting on the porch and I didn't want to stand in front of her and take pictures, so I'm over to the side. So I'm sorry that we've got this tree over here. But this is on the corner of Stewart and Kalamazoo Avenue, and this is 1889, also Queen Anne. As many of you remember, this was the first Castile bed and breakfast, and this was an example where there was no porch here, and they had to find, I don't know, can't remember if they found a photograph, but they had been looking to find something to replicate that porch. You're smiling, Sharon. I don't know if you remember if they found.
Afterwards, and they were really very, very, very close and very satisfied. It was one of those where they didn't have it at the beginning. That's something people always are looking for in these neighborhoods, when porches have been taken off or altered. They're looking for pictures of their porches.
And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. And so in this one, they took a guess and they came very, very close to what it actually looked like. This is another home on Woodward Avenue, also a Queen Anne. And I like this sort of this design up here in the gable area. And then we have, more modest, smaller Queen Annes. This is the Anderson Fuller home. This is 1894. Don't have all these dates memorized in my head. You'd think I should, but I don't. I have some very fond memories of this one because I remember one of the previous owners of this home and spending some time here in the house. But this one, is a more modest size Queen Anne. It's got a lot of those same features. You can really see the fish scales here, fish scale shingles here, the porch. Very simple porch. It's 1894. We're about 6 years before I won't say the formal end of the Queen Anne's, but it still has a lot of those similar type features. And then, of course, we talked about the Tuttle home in 1885. So it was just like with Italianate, it was a style that did not have to be of a certain size. You could have very modestly sized homes in these styles. Around the turn of the 20th century, What are we seeing in the neighborhood? Well, we're seeing a couple different styles coming into the Stewart neighborhood. And the thing about the Stewart neighborhood is that it may not have multiple examples of these styles, but they still have examples of one or two or whatever. This is the J. Driver home, which is located right next to the Stewart home. The Stewart home would be over here to the north of it on this side. And the date on this one is 1905. So what we're getting into now is we're getting into more of the Georgian Colonial. This looks very similar to a home on South Street that was also built at about the same time period, the Coleman Home. That's also Georgian Colonial. And what do we have here? Well, one of the things we have is we have a dentieled cornice. That's colonial. We've got a little colonial decoration here. We've got some dormers here. It's going to look very similar almost when we get into the four-square. The difference is, one of the differences is when you look at the size of the home, the sheer size of it, it's Georgian Colonial. We have different versions of Colonial. We have, of course, the ever popular, ever easy to identify Dutch Colonial. Colonial popular between 1900 and 1930. This one is on Kalamazoo Avenue, and it's got that distinctive gambrel roof right there on the side. We've got a couple different versions of Dutch Colonial in the Stewart neighborhood. This one is more of a front gable Dutch Colonial. And along with the Dutch Colonial, we've got the Georgian Colonial. And those of you that are familiar with the Stewart neighborhood and the Stewart Area Restoration Association might be familiar with this home on Douglas Avenue, as it is, as far as I know, still the neighborhood headquarters. And the Georgian Colonial, again, very symmetrical. You've got a very interesting portico here, very beautiful bush in the front too. I love doing these programs at this time of the year because when I looked at the programs, the previous two programs I did for Beth on architecture in various neighborhoods, I always take them at the same time period, and I always have these flowering bushes in front. They're so nice. But here we have this rounded portico, this rounded pediment up here, and the columns down here. And again, windows, for the most part, same shape in size, and again, the shutters on there. High-pitched roof, so Georgian Colonial. That's interesting, of course, as Colonial was also the style chosen not just for houses in the neighborhood, but you really have to wonder when Billingham and Cobb, a local architectural firm that probably designed just about every elementary school in Kalamazoo in the 1920s, when they were given the task of designing a school in the Woodward neighborhood, how much influence did the houses in the neighborhood have when they designed this beautiful Georgian Colonial school in 1930. It's got, again, well, this one is great because not only do you have the front portico, but then you also have, for those of you that might be familiar with the school, on the back, you have a similar portico on the back with again, the triangular pediment and the columns. This also has some very interesting fanlight windows over the doorways. Can't say too much about the doorways, but oh well, modern technology. The windows, about all the different shape and size. We've got coins, Q-U-O-I-N-S, coins, decorative elements there on the side. So beautiful, beautiful example of colonial architecture, Georgian colonial architecture. On a side note, I've got to say that I don't know, I hope everything will be all right. I know that our superintendent for the Kalamazoo Public Schools has talked about they want to replace the older schools. They're going to be tearing down Washington Elementary this summer.
Oh,
No, I'm not saying they're going to do this. I'm not. But what I'm saying is then yesterday they got the money necessary to tear down Millwood. I tried to find there was a comment he made about a survey that was done. Of course, I was never asked about how I felt about older school buildings. And one comment that I did find today is he did say that they had put money into Woodward and Parkwood Upjohn up in my neighborhood in Westnedge Hill. So I hope that's a sign that what they're doing in the Edison neighborhood and the Millwood neighborhood is not going to happen in the Stewart neighborhood, and the Westnedge Hill neighborhood. I'm not really too sure on that, but I think it's something that we're going to have to be at least wary and aware of what's going on. Because is definitely a key, very important element in the neighborhood, of course, along with the houses and the people that live there, whatever, but it certainly adds a lot to it. But please don't panic. It hasn't been said that this is what's going to be done, but I just think it's something that we need to be aware of. And of course, Georgian Colonial architecture is something that the Second Church of Christ scientists chose in 1937 when they built this building on the corner of West Main and Woodward Avenue. So, very, very popular style. And even this little house over on the corner of Elmwood and Elm is another version of Colonial. This is the Garrison Colonial. More post-World War II than pre-World War II. And the one distinctive feature about that one is it's got that second floor overhang, which is one of the distinctive features of the Garrison Colonial. So we've got a lot of colonials in the Stewart neighborhood. English Tutors, also something that you saw at this time between 1900 and 1930. English Tutors, of course, high gable roofs. We've got stucco with half timbers. I led a group of K College students yesterday on a walking tour. Beautiful day for a walking tour. And a student asked me a very interesting question because I kept saying about half timbers on the English Tudor, and she said, now did they ever use full timbers? I'm thinking, boy, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that one before. But it's always been described as half timbers. So we have this English Tudor that's on the corner of Kalamazoo and Woodward. This is another English Tudor on Douglas Avenue, not too far from the Sarah offices. Same sort of characteristics of the high gable roof, the half timbers, the use of the stucco. But we know that Forrest Van Valkenburg, when he designed the fire stations for the various neighborhoods, decided to take that style when he erected this firehouse in 1908. He chose Tudor not only for the Stewart neighborhood, but also for the Vine neighborhood. Then he chose Colonial Revival for the East Side neighborhood. So just really very, very interesting. And again, a lot of those features we're seeing with the gable roof, the stucco, the half timbers, among many things. So English Tudor. This is the Allen Boulevard. I decided to walk down Allen Boulevard one day to take some photographs because, as Sharon pointed out last week, in looking at the date of Allen Boulevard, you're looking at, again, turn of the 20th century. If you're not familiar with Allen Boulevard, it's that small street right next to St. A's off West Michigan. But this was a part of the Stewart neighborhood until Mishcal came through. Now it is part of the Stewart neighborhood again, once again, and it's also part of the local historic district. Well, we see a lot of very interesting styles in this, ones that maybe defy characterization and defy categories. This one that we see here right on the corner looks very much like that Georgian Colonial, the J. Driver home built in 1905. I'm going to throw it out, though, and say that rather than Georgian Colonial Revival, I think this, to me, is a little more prairie. Although it's got some colonial when you look at these windows here, these tri-section windows with the rounded section. The one thing that I find interesting is how wide this overhang is on this roof line. Looks very similar to some of the prairie homes that you see in the West Main Hill neighborhood. There's another one just a little bit farther down Allen Boulevard. And what I find interesting about this one, too, you can see it just a little bit here on the sides of these pillars. There is a vertical design within it, and that's something that you see a little bit in Prairie. But some interesting houses in here, in Allen Boulevard at least. We're back onto the Stewart neighborhood. Another style around the turn of the 20th century that we see is Mission Revival. This is a house that was built, I think it was around 1909. This actually sits on the other side of the Stewart house. And Mission Revival was at about the same time as Colonial Revival. Mission Revival was very popular out west and eventually, in some instances, did come over here to the Midwest. And some of the characteristics on this one, well, we're going to see stucco used as a material. It's got a very interesting portico. Here we've got a front entryway with a very interesting front. Now there was another house on Kalamazoo Avenue that I looked at, which was next to that Dutch Colonial that I showed you, that to me almost has a little flavor of Mission Revival. Why do I feel that way? Look at the roof on the porch and then also the roof on the top. It's almost like those very interesting, very typical Mission Revival, Spanish eclectic type roof lines there. For those of you that may know the story of this house on Woodward Avenue, this is not original to this piece of property. This is the Doubleday House, built around 1910, and it sat in what was known as the West Douglas neighborhood. And around 1999, Brian Spalding wanted to move it from that area to this piece of property here on Woodward Avenue. There had been a house on that site, the Parsons home, and the Parsons home burned. And so the piece of property was vacant. And the home, I think that was one of the homes that the Harper Funeral Home wanted moved for their, when they were building their new building. And so he moved it and moved it to this site. It came before the Historic District Commission because obviously one of the things that was important was to keep the setback from the other houses, which they did. Style of home, here we get into the American Foursquare. 1900 to 1930. Very cubic shaped house. This has a high pitched roof. One of these, of course, have dormers up at the top. Some have 2, some have 3. This has got a bay window on the side, but you'll see with this home, very little decoration as far as the porches. The porches are very simple. You can see some pillars here, on the railing over here. But you could get a lot of house for very little money on very little pieces of property. We've got several different Foursquares. This is not far from where Sharon lives. This is down on Elm Street before you get to Kalamazoo Avenue. You can see these houses in matching stucco. Look at the pitch, how hipped that roof is, how high that roof is. But again, a lot of those same elements that we see. And I think that with the American Foursquare and the Bungalow, it gave people an opportunity to be able to buy homes. And this sort of continues around the corner. There is a couple other Foursquares here, but very, very similar. So you can see, I think some people may assume in the Stewart neighborhood, well, it's just all 19th century homes. Well, it's not. We've got quite a wide variety of even early 20th century styles in here too. And I was just scratching the surface. I could have walked more and more and more, but you know, you got to stop after a while, especially when you get neighbors that keep staring at you when you keep circling their house once or twice. This is in the Stewart neighborhood. Of course it's on the Stewart neighborhood, that's a given. This is on Stewart. This is across the street from Woodward Elementary. Now we're getting into bungalows. This is a version of a bungalow that in some books is referred to as a semi-bungalow, a much larger bungalow. And one of the things that is distinctive about this one is that dormer on the front with the gable roof and that high sloping front roof. So we have a bungalow here on Stewart Street. Now we have more modern versions of bungalows. This is on Willard, just around the corner from where Sharon lives. And these were built by the Kalamazoo County Land Bank. And as Sharon said last week, both of these recently sold. And so the architect who designed those buildings, I would assume, having talked with him a little bit, was looking to the neighborhood for some inspiration. So he chose to be inspired by the bungalow when he designed these two. Of course, much larger than some of the more traditional bungalows, especially the ones that you see in the West Main Hill neighborhood and in the Edison neighborhood, but still getting that feel. Well, I guess I got to say that I feel sorry for those people that only go through the Stewart neighborhood one way, either going to the west or going to the east, and never take the opportunity to really get to know the neighborhood. Because the thing you miss, and this is the thing that I just love when you walk the neighborhood, you get to really see the details. Not only do you get to see beautiful houses like this, but you get to see things like this. Now this is something I photographed in the Allen Boulevard area, and I kept clearing because I wanted to make sure it said 1905, and yes, it said 1905. Think about, for those of you that are familiar in the Stewart neighborhood, how many corners when you walk by and you can see the name of the street stamped into the sidewalk. You don't get that in too many other neighborhoods. You also get wonderful detail like this. This is actually a skirting I found in that house on Stewart Avenue, just past Woodward Elementary. You know, it just sort of beckoned me to sort of come and photograph it. I mean, you miss that when you drive through one way and you don't come through the neighborhood. And detail like this. I was really enjoying, as I walked through the area, looking at the roof lines, the gable roof lines, and even the gable entryways to see something like this. Because the neighborhood has, yes, so many surprises. And for those of you that would like to see it a little better, if you don't have the pleasure of living there, please come join me in June for a walking tour, or come in September and come to the homes tour, and you can see a little bit more about the architecture of the Stewart neighborhood.